My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is the winter of 2008 and a house that wasn't even mine. My aunt and uncle owned a place on Cedar Lake up in northern Wisconsin, about 40 minutes from the nearest town with a stoplight. They spent winters in Arizona for my uncle's lungs, and every year since I turned 19, I house sat for them from November to March. I liked the quiet. I liked having the whole lake to myself, or so I thought. I worked 3 shifts a week at a diner in town, drove a rusted-out Buick with a tape deck, and spent most nights reading paperbacks by the wood stove with a cordless phone on the arm of the couch in case my boyfriend Dean called. Cedar Lake wasn't really a town. It was maybe 14 cabins strung along the shoreline, most of them summer places, dark and boarded up by October. In winter, 3 houses stayed occupied. Mine, my aunt's was one of them. An old widower named Pruitt lived 2 properties down, and there was a young couple with a baby on the far side of the water, but I barely saw their lights from that distance. The first strange thing happened in early December, and I didn't think much of it at the time. I came home from a closing shift around 11 and found the porch light off. I always left it on. I figured the bulb had burned out, and I didn't think about it again until I went to change it 2 days later and found the bulb was fine. It had just been switched off at the socket. I told myself I must have bumped it on my way out that morning. A week later, the dog started it. Pruitt kept an old blue heeler named Scout who ran loose most days. Scout took to standing at the edge of my aunt's yard around dusk, barking at the tree line behind the house, where the yard gave way to a stretch of woods that eventually connected to state land. I'd whistle for him, and he wouldn't come. He'd just keep barking at the same spot, like something was standing there that I couldn't see. Pruitt joked that Scout probably smelled a fox denning up for winter. I wanted to believe that. Then came the first big snowstorm of the season, the second week of December. It dropped about 8 inches overnight and knocked the power out for 4 hours. I remember sitting by candlelight, listening to the wind, when the cordless phone rang. I picked it up and said hello twice. Nobody answered. I could hear breathing, or maybe just static, and then a click. I called Dean right after, and he said it was probably a wrong number, that phone lines did weird things in a storm. I wanted to believe that too. The morning after the storm, I went out to shovel the porch steps, and that's when I saw it for the first time. Boot prints, half filled in by drifting snow, circling the little shed where my uncle kept the backup generator, not walking past it, circling it like someone had stood there a long time, shifting their weight from foot to foot, looking it over. I told myself it was the propane delivery man. He'd come out that week to check the tank. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. 3 days later, I noticed the woodpile. My uncle stacked cordwood along the side of the house, and I'd been pulling logs off the near end all winter, the way you do, working through a stack in order. That morning, the stack looked different, not smaller, rearranged, like somebody had taken logs off the back of the pile near the wall and restacked them on the front to hide the gap. I stood there a long time trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Firewood doesn't rearrange itself, but I also couldn't prove anyone had touched it, so I did what people do when they don't want to be scared. I let it go. Right around then, the elderly neighbor, Pruitt, mentioned something at the general store that I didn't think much of until later. He said Scout wouldn't come near the old fire road anymore, the overgrown trail behind the lake houses that used to connect to a hunting checkpoint back in the 70s, long since abandoned. He said his dog used to run that trail every day and now wouldn't set a paw on it. He laughed it off, said maybe there was a bear denning nearby. I laughed along with him. Neither one of us really believed the bear story. We just needed something to say. A few days after that, our mail carrier, a woman named Sherry, who'd driven the Cedar Lake route longer than I'd been coming out there, flagged me down at the end of the driveway. She asked, in a roundabout way, if I'd noticed anyone parked near the boat landing at odd hours. She said she'd seen a dark-colored pickup sitting there twice that week, engine off, nobody visible inside, gone by the time she came back through a few hours later. She figured it was probably nothing. Ice fishermen sometimes left trucks overnight, but she said it in the voice of someone who didn't quite believe her own explanation, and she told me to lock up good if I was staying out there alone. I told her I always did. That wasn't entirely true. I started doing it after that conversation. I mentioned the truck to the young couple across the lake the next time I saw the wife loading groceries into her car. She said they hadn't seen any truck, but their porch motion light had been tripping almost every night for 2 weeks, going off at things they couldn't find in the morning. Deer, she figured, though she admitted the baby monitor had picked up what sounded like footsteps crunching through snow outside the nursery window one night, close enough that her husband had gone out with a flashlight and found nothing there. They hadn't called the sheriff. I understood why. It's a hard thing to call about a sound. The week before Christmas, Dean came up for 2 nights. The first night was normal. We watched a movie on the DVD player, ate dinner, nothing unusual. The second morning, we woke up to a fresh 2 inches of snow that had fallen sometime after 3 a.m., and that's when everything changed. There were boot prints under my bedroom window, not near it, directly under it, close enough that whoever made them could have reached up and touched the glass. The prints didn't come from the driveway or the road. They came out of the tree line at the back of the property, crossed the yard in a straight line, stopped at my window for what looked like a long time based on how packed down and overlapping the snow was, and then walked away toward the lake instead of back into the woods. Dean wanted to call the sheriff immediately. I almost talked him out of it. That's the part that still bothers me. Looking back, how close I came to telling him it was nothing. We called anyway. The sheriff who came out, a heavy-set man named Halloran who'd worked the county for almost 20 years, walked the prints with us before the sun could melt them further. He didn't say much at first. He crouched by the window, looked at the depth of the impressions, and asked how tall I was, then measured the stride length against his own boot. "Whoever this is," he said, "wasn't in a hurry, and they weren't casing the place for a quick break-in. Somebody in a hurry doesn't stand in one spot this long." He asked if anything was missing. Nothing was, as far as I could tell. He asked if the doors had been tried, checked the frames for pry marks, found none. Before he left, he told me something that kept me up for a lot of nights afterward. He said Cedar Lake wasn't the first place this winter. 2 cabins on Miller's Pond, about 6 miles east, had reported similar things in November. Disturbed snow, moved firewood, a shed door found unlatched that the owners swore they'd locked. Nothing stolen there either. He said it like he'd been turning the pattern over in his head for weeks and hadn't landed anywhere useful. After that, I started keeping a flashlight by the bed and locking every window, even upstairs, even the ones that didn't open in winter anyway. For 9 days, nothing happened. No new snow fell, so there was nothing to read. I almost let myself relax. Then, 3 days after New Year's, another 2 inches came down overnight, and I went out at dawn before my shift, mostly to prove to myself that everything was fine. It wasn't. This time, the prints were different. Instead of one straight path, there were at least 2 distinct trails, crossing and doubling back near the porch, like 2 people had walked the yard independently of each other, or one person had walked it twice at different times of the night. One trail led to the crawlspace door under the back porch, a low panel my uncle used to store extra tarps and hoses. The panel was still latched, but the snow directly in front of it had been packed flat and smooth in a way that fresh snow doesn't do naturally. The kind of flatness you get from someone kneeling there for a long stretch of time. Beside that spot, half buried, I found a thermos cap. Metal, red, frozen to the ground. Not mine, not my aunt's. I still have it in a drawer somewhere. I've never been able to throw it away, and I've never been able to look at it for long either. I followed the second trail a short way myself before I lost my nerve. It didn't lead back toward the road the way the first one had. It cut along the side of the house, past the propane tank, and out toward the tree line at an angle I hadn't noticed before, one that would have given somebody a clear line of sight to both my bedroom window and the kitchen, where I sat most evenings with the lights on and the curtains open. I stood there a long time in the cold, working out how long someone would have had to watch the house to know that. Halloran came out again, and this time he brought a deputy. They followed the second trail back into the woods, further than I'd ever gone myself, and about a quarter mile in, along the old fire road, Pruitt's dog wouldn't walk anymore. They found what they later called a resting site. Not a tent, just a flattened patch of ground under a stand of pines, sheltered from the wind, with the remains of a small fire that had been carefully buried under dirt and snow to hide the ash. Cigarette butts, a folded blue tarp, and a spiral notebook, swollen with damp, that Halloran bagged and took with him without letting me read it. He came back 2 days later and told me only part of what was in it. Pages of dates, times, short notes about porch lights, which houses had cars in the driveway and which didn't, which nights someone was likely to be alone. Cedar Lake was in there, so was Miller's Pond. So were at least 2 other lake communities across the county line that Halloran's department didn't even have jurisdiction over. He said the notes went back at least 2 winters, maybe longer, based on how many pages were filled. He never told me if my house had more entries than the others. I've always wondered if that was a kindness, or if he genuinely didn't know. They never found who it was. The camp was abandoned before they'd even finished searching it. Cold ash, footprints already 3 days old, nothing recent enough to track through the trees before the ground froze too hard to hold a print. Halloran said whoever it was had likely watched them find the site from somewhere close by and simply never came back to that spot again. I stayed at Cedar Lake through the rest of that winter, though Dean started coming up almost every weekend after that, and I stopped house-sitting for my aunt and uncle the following year. I told them I'd found a job that conflicted with the schedule. That wasn't true. I just couldn't make myself spend another season alone out there. Here's the part I still think about. Late February, after most of the snow that season had already melted twice and refrozen, we got one more storm, a wet, heavy one that dropped 6 inches overnight. Dean was with me that weekend. In the morning, we found a single set of prints, fresh, starting from the tree line and walking in a straight, unhurried line, all the way to the edge of the porch, and then stopping. No prints leading away, no prints doubling back into the woods. Just a clean stop at the bottom step, like whoever it was had simply stood there a while, looking at the house, and then lifted straight up into the air, which of course isn't possible, and which Halloran, when we called him one last time, had no real explanation for either, beyond saying that wind and thaw can do strange things to snow if you wait even an hour too long before you look at it. I've asked myself since whether that's really what happened, whether the wind erased a second set of prints walking away, or whether somebody stood at the edge of my porch for a long time deciding something and then changed their mind. I never got an answer, and neither did the sheriff's department, as far as I know. The case is still open. Halloran retired a few years back, and I don't know if anyone picked it up after him. I don't house sit anymore, and I don't live near woods if I can help it. But every winter, the first time snow falls deep enough to hold a print, I find myself at the window before I've even had coffee, looking at my own yard, checking it the way you'd check a room after you've heard a noise in your sleep. If this story kept you watching, leave a like, share it with someone who loves scary stories, and follow my page for more.